What is going on, everybody? Hope everybody is enjoying their day so far. We are back with another Bracketology update here on this February 27th as we get closer and closer to Selection Sunday. And we had another great weekend of college basketball, another top slate. We'll have some more big games this weekend, headlined by Duke in Michigan, the number 1 and number 2 team in the country, battling in Washington, D.C. You'd have, Texas Tech pulling off the upset over Arizona on Saturday. We had a couple of big games outside of the Power Four conferences, and we also had Iowa State getting some huge victories, including last night against Houston, and then over the weekend defeating Kansas. So Iowa State, definitely a team trending in the right direction. We'll also look at how Arizona is. Are they still a number 1 seed? We will look at the CBS Bracketology today. I know that in the past couple of Bracketology updates, we've been looking at Joe Lunardi's from ESPN's Bracketology. But I thought this week we could try to change it up and go with CBS's Bracketology. So let's go ahead and dive into the bubble. Let's go through the last 4 in, see who would be in the first 4 games, and then we'll dive into each region, just look at the top 4 seeds and maybe see if there's any differential between CBS's Bracketology and ESPN's Bracketology. So without further ado, let's go ahead and look at the February 17th updated Bracketology. So looking at your last 4 teams in, you have St. Mary's, TCU, Missouri, and San Diego State. So right now, these teams would be involved in their first 4 games. So as you can see there, the East region, that would be the 2 11 seeds, St. Mary's, the Gales, who sit at a record of 23-4 against TCU out of the Big 12 with a record of 16-9. Then in the West, you would have another play-in game between 2 11 seeds. You have Missouri out of the SEC with an overall record of 17-8, and San Diego State out of the Mountain West. They sit at 18-6 overall so far on the regular season. And looking at the first 4 out, so this is teams on the wrong side of the bubble at the moment. Santa Clara, that's another team out of the West Coast Conference. They sit at 22-6. I think Lunardi has them right on the bubble as well. So Santa Clara did have a big opportunity to really get on the right side of the bubble if they did get a victory over Gonzaga. But Gonzaga ended up winning that game, and now they are now solely in first place in the West Coast Conference. Now, could that change? That could definitely, do that over the last couple of weeks of the regular season. But at the moment, Santa Clara is on the outside looking in right now. Same with New Mexico with a record of 19-6. The Lobos still have some work to do. Same with VCU and Ohio State. Ohio State trending in the wrong direction, especially in the last couple of weeks here, as well as VCU. So these are teams, Santa Clara and VCU, usually we see like the 22-win or even 20-plus win teams firmly in the field. But when you have a net in the middle 40s, you definitely have some work to do here, trying to get into this field of 68. So that's the bubble. Let's go back to the first 4 games. So you have the South region. You have Bethune-Cookman, the 16 seed, facing off against New Jersey Tech. So that would be 2 16 seed matchups, and the winner would get the 1 seed in the South region. Same with the West region. You have the 2 16 seeds would be facing off in the first 4 games. You would have Long Island and Howard, and the winner of that game would face off against the winner of the number 1 seed in the West region. So that is to look at who's on the bubble. Now let's go ahead and dive into at least the top 4 seeds and maybe look at some changes just between the other sites that we have been looking at over the last couple of weeks. So it looks like the only difference that I've seen in Lunardi's is that Lunardi still has Arizona as the top overall seed. In this one, Michigan now is the top overall seed. And if you go back to the 2007 college football season, what a matchup that would be in the first round between number 1 seed Michigan and App State. Looks like the number 2 seed in this Iowa State, definitely a big movers. I know that in the last bracketology, they were a 3 seed, but with big wins over Houston and Kansas over the weekend. Iowa State is definitely turning in the right direction and could be a team that could all ultimately make it all the way to the Final Four and win the national championship. But we do see Iowa State in Michigan's region. We have Florida. They are still firmly on the 3 seed. Florida looking like a dominant team. They are really starting to put it together and are well on their way to winning the regular season in the SEC, especially with Texas A&M kind of falling off. Alabama, their inconsistencies over the past couple of weeks, and some teams kind of faltering down the stretch. The number 4 seed is Gonzaga. Like I mentioned, Gonzaga did get a huge victory over the weekend against Santa Clara. That was whoever won that game was going to ultimately leapfrog into first place in the West Coast Conference. So that was definitely a bounce-back win for Gonzaga. So Gonzaga rounding out the top 4 seeds. I don't really see too many changes. Looks like Tennessee is in this CBS. I know that ESPN has them right around the 5 or 6 seed, but they are the 6 seed. Miami of Ohio still 11 seed. Looks like Texas A&M falling down the seed line. I know that they were as high as a 7 seed, but they have gone on quite a losing streak. They went from the top of the SEC to kind of the middle of the pack now, but we do see the Aggies fall to 10. Wisconsin, one of the hottest teams in the country, they go up from the 8 line now off to the 7 line, so they would get a date with the Aggies in the first round. Looks like Clemson, also another team that is falling off, at least on the seeding wise, but Clemson was a projected 6 seed last week. Looks like they are now an 8 seed. They would get a date with the Texas Longhorns. Looks like St. John's is still right around that 5 seed, as well as others that we have mentioned, like UNC Wilmington, still 13. South Florida projected at 12. I know that Tulsa was projected in here a couple of weeks ago, but looks like South Florida has firmly been that projected conference tournament winner from the American, and same with North Dakota State in UT Martin. Let's go ahead and look at the East region. You see the number 1 overall seed in this region. That is the Duke Blue Devils. So it looks like Arizona, at least in this bracketology, has fallen to the number 3 overall number 1 seed, and Duke taking over the number 2 seed in this one. Looks like Houston is still firmly in as the number 2 seed. I think that if they would have beaten Iowa State, maybe you would have an argument for Houston to be that final number 1 seed, but it looks like it's probably going to be UConn if I were have to guessing. Nebraska is a 3 seed. Nebraska did lose over the weekend, but looks like their seed line has not really changed. So they are still firmly a number 3 seed, at least in this projection. And then Texas Tech. Texas Tech, a huge weekend for the Red Raiders, like I mentioned, with their upset over Arizona. This is definitely a team that I am keeping my eyes on, and they could definitely make a deep run in this tournament, especially if they get a good enough path. Looks like Michigan State is right around that line of the 5 seed. I know that early on this season they were projected 3 seed, but looks like right now at this moment they are projected 5 seed in the field. Kentucky has been hovering around the 6 seed. Kentucky still finding a way to build their resume in what has been a loaded SEC so far. Villanova is the 7 seed, so they've been firmly as a 7 seed as well. Same with USC. USC has been projected like a 9 or a 10 seed. And then you can say the same with Iowa and SMU. Iowa and SMU have firmly been an 8 and a 9 seed. So now let's go on to the West region, like I mentioned, talking about Duke making that leap over Arizona. Looks like Arizona in this projection is the number 3 overall number 1 seed, but they would still be in the West. So that's honestly good for them. They would have pretty much home court advantage the rest of the way. Your 2 seed in this is Purdue out of the Big Ten, and Purdue has either been a 3 seed or a 2 seed in the bracketologies that we looked at. And Vanderbilt, though, in this one, this is a big change that I really noticed from ESPN to CBS's. I know that ESPN has Vanderbilt as a 5 seed, but in this one, Vandy is a 3 seed. So I'm curious to see once we get to Selection Sunday where the Commodores are really slated. It looks like Virginia is the number 4 seed. Virginia has been hovering around that number 4 seed And then Arkansas, another big mover out of the SEC. The Hogs just continue to win. Probably one of the hottest teams outside of Florida in the SEC would be Arkansas. This is definitely a very talented team. And if they get a nice draw like this, I could definitely see them at least go to the Sweet 16. This was a team that made it to the Sweet 16 last year before losing to Texas Tech. But Arkansas is a projected 5 seed. So it looks like the Razorbacks are moving up in this bracketology. St. Louis is right there on the 7th line. They have really been on the 7th line for the past couple of weeks. Looking at the 8-9, NC State and Indiana have been right around that 8-9 matchup, so they would face off, and the winner of that would get more than likely Arizona in that one. And now let's go on to the South region as we do see our final number 1 seed, the UConn Huskies, out of the Big East. Like I mentioned, if Houston would have won last night, then I could definitely see the jump of Houston over UConn, but UConn just continues to build their resume in Big East play. So UConn would be the number 1 seed in the South region if this were to remain the same. Illinois, another Big Ten representative, is the 2 seed. Illinois has been on the 2 line for the last bracketologies that we've been looking at, so no changes there. Same with Kansas. Kansas probably would have moved up to the 2 seed if they would have taken down Iowa State on the road. But the Jayhawks ultimately fallen there. So Kansas remains at the 3 line. Louisville movers out of the ACC is now a 4 seed. I know that Louisville in the last one that we looked at was a 6 seed, but the Cards continue to really stack up some wins that are really helping their case and moving up the seed line. And then you had the 5 seed Alabama out of the SEC. Alabama has really been jumping around like being a 4 and a 5 seed. BYU the same. They've been really stuck at being the number 6 seed. Looks like they would get Georgia. Then really no other changes. Miami and Auburn have been right there, the 8 and the 9 line, as well as Utah State and UCF. Looks like UCF has dropped from the 9 to the 10 seed, and they would get Utah State. So that is it for the bracketology. Now, as we always do here, we are going to pull up our bracket predictions. I usually use pdffiller.com. I just search up March Madness bracket fillable that I could just use and show to you guys. And if you want to fill this out yourself, I'm sure there's other websites that you can use. So let me go ahead and pull it up really quickly here, and we will get into our latest predictions here. As like I mentioned, we were just a couple of weeks away from the conference tournaments really get underway, and that's when we really find out who's going to submit themselves on what seed line. So let's go ahead and start off with our predictions, starting off with the top left portion of the bracket. You do have your number 1 overall seed, the Michigan Wolverines out of the Big Ten. They will get a date between the Sun Belt projected conference tournament winners, App State. So I don't think that Michigan's going to have any problem on this one. Michigan has been a very dominant team, and I'm definitely going to be curious how they face off against the Duke Blue Devils in Washington, D.C. I think that is probably going to be the game of the season so far. So this honestly, like the winner of that game may even move up to the number 1 overall seed, just depending on the margin of victory in that game. But I really don't see any issues with Michigan facing off against App State. So I will have the Wolverines moving on to the round of 32. So now let's move on to our first of 4, 8, 9 games. We have Clemson and Texas. Now, these are both teams that have just been a roller coaster ride this season. I am ultimately going to go with Clemson in this one. So let's go on now. That, like I mentioned, just 2 teams I just don't really, have too much faith in. You just got to pick a winner in these games, but I am going to go with Clemson. Now let's go on to St. John's in South Florida. Now, South Florida would be a dangerous 12 seed, but the way that St. John's have been playing, especially in the past couple of weeks, it's hard to really pick against the Johnnies, so I will go with St. John's. Moving on there, and they await the winner of Gonzaga and UNC Wilmington. Now, Gonzaga, they have definitely had some rough games. I know that the Portland game was definitely the games that you really circle. UNC Wilmington, this has been a 13 seed that I've really been keeping my eye on, and I'm going to continue it. I'm going to go with at least one upset here. I'm going to go with UNC Wilmington getting this thing done. I think that there's going to be at least maybe 1 or 2, like 12 or 13 seeds getting an upset here. I think that Gonzaga is one of those teams that are definitely prone to an upset. I know that Mark Few is always consistent in making it to the Sweet 16. However, I think that this UNC Wilmington team is definitely special and ready for a run. Now let's move on to Tennessee and Miami of Ohio. That's your 6 and 11 seed. Now, I have been picking Miami of Ohio. I just don't think that this is a great matchup for them. Tennessee plays elite defense. I just think that the Vols will get this thing done. So give me Tennessee to move on there. Though in Miami of Ohio does get a good enough draw, I think that this is a team that's still undefeated, even though they play in the MAC. This is a team to really watch out for here, especially when the tournament gets rolling in middle of March. Now let's go on to the defending champs facing off against North Dakota State in the 3 versus the 4 team. This is another one that you don't really have to spend too much time on. Florida is really starting to play well down the stretch. They're really starting to figure out. Like I mentioned, they did have a tough stretch to start off their season. That's why they got off so slow. But right now, in the middle of SEC play, they are looking as dominant as any team in the country at the moment. Now let's go on to our 7 and 10 matchup. We do have a Big Ten SEC showdown here. Wisconsin, who have been one of the hottest teams in their conference, and the Texas A&M, pretty much the opposite of Wisconsin right now. Texas A&M is kind of falling off. They were at the moment of only being like the only undefeated SEC team, but Texas A&M has really faltered here in February. So with that being said, I'm just going to go with the guard play of Wisconsin. I think that this is going to be a high-scoring game. If we do get this in the first round, I'm going to go with the Badgers, moving on to the second round. And then we have our final first round in this quadrant of the bracket. We have Iowa State, UT Martin. How can you really pick against Iowa State at the moment? I mean, they've had about as impressive of wins the past 2 games, defeating Kansas, and then last night taking down Houston. So now let's go on to our second round games. Really only upset that we had in this portion of the bracket was number 13 seed UNC Wilmington getting it done against Gonzaga. Now let's move on to 1 versus 8 matchup. Michigan and Clemson would be a hell of a matchup on the football field, but on the court, I'm going to go with Michigan. I just think that Michigan is just going to overpower Clemson in this matchup. Then we see St. John's and UNC Wilmington. I would love to continue UNC Wilmington Cinderella story. However, I just think that St. John's is going to be a little bit too much. So give me the Johnnies moving on there. So we have 1 and 5 set up there. Then we have an all SEC battle in the second round. Tennessee is the 6 seed. Florida is the 3 seed. Once again, I am on the Florida train. I picked the Gators to win the national championship last year. The way that they're playing, how could you not even pick them to go at least to Elite 8 at the moment? So I will go with Florida. And then Wisconsin, Iowa State. This would be a hell of a game. I believe that both of these teams played a couple of years ago in March Madness, and I believe that Wisconsin got the win. But I just think that Iowa State's going to get it done there. So no upsets right there happening. So Iowa State moves on there to the Sweet 16. Now let's move on to our Sweet 16 games. We have number 1 seed Michigan and number 5 seed St. John's. I think that St. John's would give Michigan a little bit of a test, but Michigan is just too much for St. John's in this matchup. Then we have Florida and Iowa State. Man, this would be a coin flip for me. I am very, very high on both of these teams in Florida and Iowa State. But like I mentioned, Iowa State is about impressive as you can get. So I am going to go with Iowa State. Moving on to the Elite 8, and we have Michigan facing off against number 2 seed Iowa State. This would be another hell of a game. I mean, we get Michigan, St. John's, Florida, Iowa State. That would be a hell of a Sweet 16. But right now, I mean, I've been picking Michigan as my national champ for the last couple of weeks. Really nothing to change. I know the Iowa State and elite basketball team, same with Michigan. But I'm going to go with the Michigan Wolverines being our first number 1 seed, making it all the way to the Final Four. Now let's go on to the right, the top right portion of the bracket. We'll kind of fill out the top, and then we'll go on to the bottom of this bracket. We have the Duke Blue Devils, the number 1 seed representing the ACC, and they would get Merrimack. This would be really no sweat for Duke, in my opinion. I think that Duke would survive and advance on that one. Then we have Iowa and SMU, your 8-9 matchup. Both of these teams have been a roller coaster ride. I mean, you get it with 8-9s, but I'm going to go with Iowa advancing on there, taking down the Mustangs of SMU. And then we have Michigan State and Liberty. And Liberty is also another number 12 seed to really keep your eye on. I know that we're going to get to High Point in a little bit, which I know that a lot of people are picking that High Point upset last year's tournament, but they didn't get the job done. But I will go with Sparty advancing on there. can ever pick against Tom Izzo when it comes to the month of March. So I will go with Michigan State. Move it on there. Then we have Texas Tech and High Point. I mean, Texas Tech, one of those like few teams that I always like to ride with in March Madness. And the way they've been playing, it's hard not to pick against the Red Raiders. This is a team with a lot of talent. So give me Texas Tech. Even though that High Point is a very talented 13 seed, I think that Texas Tech is going to be way too much for High Point in that matchup. Then we have Kentucky versus the first play-in game. We have St. Mary's and TCU. I would go with St. Mary's winning that matchup, but I'm going to go with Kentucky. Kentucky, like I mentioned with Florida, that was a team that got off to a slow start to the season. But once they got to conference play, this team has really figured out. And the guard play that Kentucky has, I think, is about as good as any team in their conference that they play in. So give me Kentucky. I know that there's always an 11 seeds, but to me, I feel like these 11 seeds aren't as strong as years past. So I think that Kentucky gets this thing done. Now we go to Nebraska and UC Irvine. Nebraska, one of those fan favorite teams to watch this season out of the Big Ten. So I will be picking them. Then we have number 7 seed Villanova, number 10 seed USC. I will go with my first 10/7 upset. Give me the Trojans to get this one done. That would be a hell of a matchup between Villanova and USC. But I will go with the Trojans moving on to the round of 32. And then we get Houston and Navy. This has been a projected matchup for the last couple of weeks. I will go with Houston. Not really too worried about them, even with the loss last night against Iowa State. Now let's go on to our second round games. We have Duke and Iowa. I just don't think that Iowa would have the offense to really test to Duke. So give me Duke to win this one. And then what a game that we would get. I mean, this should honestly be like at least a Sweet 16, maybe even an Elite 8 matchup between Michigan State and Texas Tech. I'm going to go with Texas Tech, though, out of the Big 12, getting this one done. This would be a close battle between two high-powered basketball programs. I will go with Texas Tech. And then we have Kentucky and Nebraska. Give me the upset in Kentucky in this one. Once again, this would be another high-scoring shootout. But I will go with the Wildcats advancing on there. And then we have USC and Houston. I just don't think that Houston would have any problem with USC. So give me the Cougars advancing on to the Sweet 16. So now let's go on to our first Sweet 16 battle. We have Duke versus Texas Tech. And I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to go with Texas Tech pulling off the 4 versus number 1 seed upset. So that's our first number 1 seed going down. I do have Texas Tech. I just think that this is a team that is playing lights out down the stretch here. Then we have Kentucky and Houston. I'm going to set up an all Big 12 battle between Texas Tech and Houston. So the winner now going to the Final Four. We have the number 4 seed Texas Tech and number 2 seed Houston. I don't know if I'm drinking too much of the Kool-Aid, but I'm going to go with Texas Tech advancing all the way to the Final Four. So that's our first top 3 seed advancing to the Final Four. So give me the Red Raiders to advance to the Final Four. Now let's go on now to UConn's regional, as they are the number 1 seed in this bottom left portion of our bracket. We have UConn facing off against Bethune-Cookman and in New Jersey Tech. New Jersey Tech is below 500, but they are still projected favorite in their conference. I would go with Bethune-Cookman, but ultimately it will not matter. UConn is just going to overpower whoever number 16 seed advances on from Dayton. So I will go with the UConn Huskies there. Moving on. Then we have the 8-9 matchup. I mean, this would be another great game that we get in the first round, Miami and Auburn. But I will go with Auburn advancing on there. Those are just two teams. Once again, the 8-9s are just up and down teams that you really can't trust. But I will go Auburn advancing on there. Then we have Alabama and Belmont. Belmont usually has some history in this tournament, pulling off some upsets, but I just don't see it against the Crimson Tide. I mean, if Alabama is lining up from 3, then Belmont just does not stand a chance at all. So I will go with Alabama advancing on there. And then we have Louisville facing off against Stephen F. Austin. I mean, Louisville, everyone wants to talk about North Carolina and Duke out of the ACC, but Louisville, this is definitely a team that could definitely make some noise come March. Then we have BYU and Georgia. BYU did lose one of their key guards in Saunders to a torn ACL, so that's definitely a big blow for the Cougars, but I still trust BYU over Georgia. Georgia had a strong start to the season. You could pretty much say that for most of the SEC teams, but Georgia kind of faltering down the stretch, so I'm going to go with BYU, even with the injury to Saunders, one of their best shooters that they got on that squad. Then we have Kansas facing off against East Tennessee State in the 3 versus the 14. I am going to go with Kansas in this one. Pretty easy matchup. I think that for Kansas. And then Utah State and UCF. I'm going to go with another 10/7 upset. Give me the Knights out of Central Florida. Another Big 12 representative. I think that there's going to be a lot of Big 12, moving on at least like to the Sweet 16. So I'm going to go with UCF over Utah State. And then we have Illinois and Austin Peay in the 2 in the 15. I will go with Illinois. And same thing. I just think that the Big 10 and the Big 12 are going to flex their muscles once this Field 68 is unveiled. Now let's go on to UConn and number 9 seed Auburn. I think that in the past couple of years, I probably would be picking Auburn in this matchup. But Auburn just hasn't really shown me too much. I mean, they've just been inconsistent. At least UConn has shown that they can be consistent. I'm going to go with UConn in this 1-9 battle. Then we have Alabama and number 4 seed Louisville. I'm going to go with Louisville in this one. I think that if you asked me like a month ago, I'd probably be going with Alabama easily. But the way that Louisville has been playing down the stretch, I am going to go with the Cards advancing on there. Then we have BYU and Kansas. I'm going to go with Kansas in this one. I just think that the injury to Saunders is going to limit how far that BYU could go this season. So I'm going to go with Kansas. Then we have UCF in Illinois. I like UCF's potential. I just think that Illinois is going to be a little bit just too much for the Knights. So give me Illinois to advance on there. Then we have UConn facing off against number 4 seed Louisville. I am going to go with the Huskies advancing on there. That would be another great game between 1 versus the 4, but I will go with UConn advancing on there. And then we have Kansas facing off against Illinois in the 3 versus the 2. I'll go with a minor upset. If you even want to call this an upset, I will go with Kansas. And we're going to have another number 1 seed falling. I'm going to have the Kansas Jayhawks knocking off the number 1 seed in this one. So we have another top number 1 seed advancing on. So far we do have 2 Big 12 teams, 1 Big 10 team. So let's go ahead and fill out this final region as we have Arizona, who is the 3rd overall number 1 seed. They would face off against the winner of Long Island and Howard. We'll go with the Sharks of Long Island to win that one, but ultimately I will have Arizona. I know that this is a team that is coming off of back-to-back losses, but to be honest with you, I'm not really panicking about them. This is still one of the more dominant teams in college basketball. I just think that Arizona is going to go on a run here. Then NC State in Indiana. I'm going to trust Will Wade here. I'm going to go with NC State in the Wolfpack to advance on there. That would be a great 8-9 game, but I'm going to go with NC State. Then we have Arkansas and Yale. It feels like Yale the past couple of years has been able to spark an upset, but I just don't see it against Arkansas. Arkansas, one of those teams that is also, catching my eye out of the SEC. So I think that the Hogs are going to be too much for Yale in that one. Then we have the 4 and the 13, Virginia against Cal Baptist. I will have Virginia moving on there. I just think that Virginia can really just put up some defense against Cal Baptist. So give me Virginia in that one. Then we have North Carolina facing off against the winner of Missouri and San Diego State. Give me Missouri to win that game, but I just don't think that the winner of that one will pose much of a challenge to North Carolina. So give me North Carolina to advance on to the second round. Then we have Vandy facing off against Portland State. I will go with the Vandy boys to get this one done. So give me the Commodores. And then we have St. Louis and UCLA. St. Louis, running those teams, outside of, Miami of Ohio has really been a fun team to watch this season. So let's go ahead and pick them to win a game here in March. So give me St. Louis to advance on there. Then we have Purdue and Wright State in the 2 and the 15. Don't think that Purdue will have really any troubles against Wright State. So give me the Boilermakers to chug along to the second round. Now let's go on to the second round matchups. We have Arizona facing off against NC State. Don't think that Arizona will have too much trouble against the Wolfpack. NC State is very talented, but Arizona is just on another level right now. So give me Arizona. Then we have Arkansas and Virginia. Give me the 5-4 slight upset. I will go with Arkansas pulling this one out over Virginia. So that is another 5 seed advancing on there. Then we have North Carolina and Vandy. I'm just going to go North Carolina. I mean, Vandy, I cannot figure out this team whatsoever. They have some really quality wins, and they have some bad losses on their resume. So I will go North Carolina and advance it on there. Then we have St. Louis facing off against Purdue. I will go with Purdue winning this matchup and setting up an epic Sweet 16 showdown between North Carolina and Purdue. And what a Sweet 16 this is. I mean, we have Arizona and Arkansas, North Carolina and Purdue. So starting off with the first matchup, Arizona and Arkansas. I will go with Arizona moving on there. And then we have North Carolina and Purdue. It's going to be all chalk in this region, as I do have Purdue knocking off the number 6 seed in North Carolina. So a date to the Final Four. We have Arizona facing off against the number 2 seed Purdue. Call me crazy, but I have 3 Big 12 teams all advancing on to the Final Four, as we do have Arizona moving on and facing off against Texas Tech for the right to the national championship game. So we have the 2 1 seeds with Michigan and Arizona. Then we have a 1 3 seed with Kansas and a 1 4 seed with Texas Tech. So let's go move on now to our first Final Four matchup. We have the number 1 seed Michigan facing off against the number 3 seed Kansas. I mean, this would be 2 great matchups, but I'm going to go with Michigan. Once again, I mean, I've been picking them to win the national champion. This is a team that has left no doubt on the court. Like I mentioned, the big test this weekend against Duke on a neutral court. So we'll see how the Wolverines fare. But at the moment, I'm going to go with Michigan moving on to the national championship. And Texas Tech facing off against Arizona. I think that Texas Tech is going to ride the momentum here. Give me Texas Tech. So we have a 4 seed. This is my first really 4 seed going on a run here. So I will have Texas Tech advancing on to the national championship to face off against Michigan. And Michigan is going to be my national champion, which has been like for the past month or so. This is a team, once again, like I mentioned, has really left no doubt. So, I mean, I'm very high on all 4 of these teams making the Final Four. I'm also high on like Florida, Houston as well. I know that North Carolina is a 6 seed, even Arkansas, you know, being a 5 seed. I mean, there's a lot of like outside of the top 3 seeds that I think that could really make a run. But ultimately, I have Michigan, Texas Tech, Kansas, and Arizona. Michigan winning the national championship in this latest Bracketology update. So let me know at the moment, who would your national champion be in this February 17th in 2026. So we're going to be back here next Tuesday looking at the latest Bracketology. We'll probably shift back to ESPN. We're going to be probably going back and forth from CBS and ESPN's Bracketology. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in to today's video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here next time. So long for now.